The American Bankers Association has been running one of the most coordinated lobbying campaigns Washington has seen on a technology bill in years. Their argument to Senate holdouts is this: U.S. commercial banks hold approximately $17.6 trillion in deposits. The interest margin between what banks pay depositors and what they charge borrowers is one of their highest margin revenue lines. If regulated stablecoins can offer competitive yield to holders, the same way a money market fund or Treasury bill does, that deposit base becomes a competitive market for the first time. J.P. Morgan and Bank of America executives have cited a Treasury Department study projecting up to $6.6 trillion in potential deposit migration if stablecoins offered yield. That number gave banking lobbyists their legislative lever. They used it on Senators Mike Rounds, Tom Tillis, and a handful of Democratic holdouts to frame stablecoin yield as a systemic risk, not an innovation question. And it worked. But here's what Patrick Witt, the White House's chief crypto advisor, said publicly on CoinDesk TV on April 13th. He confirmed that the stablecoin yield compromise secured by Senators Angela Alsobrooks and Tom Tillis is intact, a deal that allows activity-based rewards on stablecoins while banning passive yield on static holdings. And he said negotiations have made what he called considerable progress in the background on the other sticking points: DeFi compliance, ethics language, CFTC, SEC seat allocations. All of these issues felt intractable and unsolvable at one point in time. So the fact that we've been able to close out a lot of them gives me confidence that we can close out these other ones too. That is Witt's verbatim statement. And now Trump's Mar-a-Lago statement has added presidential political pressure on top of that technical progress. The banks are losing the argument, the political backing, and as of April 25th, the president. But that's not even the biggest shift this week. What I'm about to show you next is the detail about the Mar-a-Lago event itself that most coverage glossed over. Because once you understand who was in that room and why, the bill's remaining timeline looks very different. That's next. The private gathering in Mar-a-Lago on April 25th was billed as the most exclusive conference in the world. The guest list was not random. It included the top holders of the Trump meme coin, Tether CEO Paolo Ardoino, major institutional crypto investors, and Senate stakeholders with direct relevance to the Clarity Act vote. Trump used the gathering to reaffirm his support for the digital asset industry, and to specifically name the banking lobby as the entity standing in the way. The White House won't let the banks ruin the crypto market structure legislation. That is his documented statement. Now let's understand the political mechanics underneath that statement. Trump's family holds a 38% stake in World Liberty Financial, a DeFi and stablecoin platform co-founded with his three sons. Bloomberg estimated last summer that Trump's family has generated roughly $620 million from crypto ventures, including WLF and the Trump meme coin. The World Liberty Financial stablecoin product requires the Clarity Act to legally offer yield to holders in the U.S. Trump's personal financial interests and the legislative outcome are now pointing at exactly the same target. TD Securities analyst Jarrett Seibert had noted in March that resolving the stablecoin yield standoff would require Trump's personal intervention to force both sides into the compromises needed. That intervention arrived on April 25th. The senators who were holding out sat in a room with the President of the United States, surrounded by the institutional investors they answer to politically, and heard directly what is now expected of them. This is applied political pressure in a controlled environment, and the Clarity Act Senate calendar now reflects that pressure. Now, before you read all of that as a clean path to passage, there's a catch that the optimistic read misses. And if you don't understand it, you may be misreading how close actually is. That's next. There are three remaining obstacles to the Clarity Act that Trump's Mar-a-Lago statement didn't resolve. First, ethics language. Senate Democrats, led by Adam Schiff and Ruben Gallego, are insisting that a provision barring senior government officials from profiting off crypto ventures be included in the bill. Gallego told reporters, "There's backsliding on ethics. There are people within the industry who don't understand that this is going to kill the bill." The specific target is Trump himself, whose family's $620 million in crypto income makes the ethics provision a direct personal interest, not a procedural debate. Senate Democrats have raised concerns about DeFi protocols creating vulnerabilities for illicit finance. The bill's current draft does not satisfy all Democratic holdouts on how DeFi platforms must comply with AML requirements. Third, the Senate calendar. Trump has separately threatened not to sign any legislation until Congress sends him a voter ID package first. If that threat holds and the Clarity Act passes Senate, it could still face a presidential signature delay. Senate floor time is always at a premium. Iran, budget reconciliation, and the midterm campaign calendar are all competing for the same hours. The bloc reported in April that sources describe this as a do-or-die window. Either something comes together in the next 2 to 14 days, or it won't. That is the honest calibration. The direction is clear, the obstacles are specific, and the timeline is narrower than the bullish read suggests. And that brings us to the part most channels won't connect, because it requires moving from the legislative story into the actual demand math. Because the Clarity Act's price impact is not about sentiment. It's about a very specific mechanical relationship between supply and institutional demand. And the numbers are more striking than most people have run. Let's build the demand case from the ground up. Not narratives, numbers. Starting point. SWIFT processes over $5 trillion in daily payment instructions. Its connected network of 11,500 banks handles cross-border flows that underpin the vast majority of global trade and finance. The hidden cost of that infrastructure. Banks must pre-fund Nostro and Vostro accounts in foreign currencies around the world. Capital sitting idle, earning nothing, waiting to be used. The total value of that trapped capital is estimated at $27 trillion globally. Ripple's on-demand liquidity product solves this specific problem using XRP as a bridge asset. Instead of pre-funding foreign accounts, a payment flows through the XRP ledger in 3 to 5 seconds and converts to local currency on arrival. No pre-funding, no trapped capital. Settlement finality in seconds. The cost differential is documented. SWIFT international wires cost $25 to $50 per transaction. XRP ledger transactions cost an average of $0.0002. That is a 99.9% cost reduction at the individual transaction level. Ripple's cumulative institutional payment volume has crossed 95 billion, with monthly ODL flows above 15 billion. Now here's the SWIFT development that changed the competitive picture last month. SWIFT's new retail payments framework covers over 50 banks and 25-plus corridors going live by mid-2026. At least 30 of those banks already have ties to Ripple's ecosystem. But here's the critical nuance. Most of those banks use RippleNet for messaging only. Only around 40% use on-demand liquidity, the product that actually requires XRP as a bridge asset. That 40% figure is the pressure point. The Clarity Act converts regulatory ambiguity into statute. The moment XRP's commodity classification is permanent in federal law, the compliance burden that has kept RippleNet messaging-only partners from shifting to full ODL integration drops significantly. That shift from messaging-only to XRP-active settlement is not a toggle switch, but it is a gradient. And each percentage point of RippleNet partners that activates ODL increases the structural demand for liquid XRP in settlement corridors. Standard Chartered's Jeffrey Kendrick has modeled $4 to $8 billion in additional ETF inflows alone under a Clarity scenario. That is the regulated capital gateway, separate from ODL demand. Both vectors converge on the same supply constraint. Exchange reserves at a 7-year low of 1.7 billion XRP, a supply-compressed asset with 2 simultaneous demand drivers. The price math is not speculative, it's arithmetic. If you're following this level of signal-to-noise breakdown and you haven't subscribed yet, this is what we build every week. Legislative mechanics, institutional demand curves, on-chain supply data, mapped to price without the hype. Subscribe now if you want the next breakdown before the market prices it in. One more development from the past 2 weeks that reframes the competitive landscape entirely. Deutsche Bank combined Ripple's blockchain infrastructure with Swift earlier in 2026 to build an enhanced cross-border payment ledger. Major banks like HSBC, Standard Chartered, Bank of America, and JP Morgan have all piloted or integrated Ripple's technology in some form. This is not a Ripple versus Swift story anymore. It is a convergence story. A significant portion of Swift-connected institutions, estimated at around 60%, are reportedly engaging with Ripple's ecosystem in some form, whether through pilots, partnerships, or parallel testing of new payment rails. That means Ripple is not fighting the existing financial infrastructure. It is being absorbed into it. And the trigger for full activation, the moment those 60% move from parallel testing to production deployment, is regulatory certainty. Ripple's on-demand liquidity eliminates the need for pre-funded nostro-vostro accounts, unlocking up to $27 trillion in dormant liquidity globally that can be reallocated to lending, investing, or development. When that capital starts moving, even a fraction of it, through XRP-active ODL corridors rather than Swift messaging-only rails, the demand profile for XRP changes structurally, not in price target terms, in liquidity math terms. The float available for settlement at current prices cannot satisfy that demand without price adjustment. Here is where everything lands this week. On April 25th, President Trump stood at Mar-a-Lago in front of Tether's CEO, institutional investors, and Senate stakeholders, and told them the White House will not let banks destroy the crypto market structure bill. Patrick Witt confirmed on April 13th that the stablecoin yield compromise is intact and that multiple other sticking points have been resolved behind the scenes. The Clarity Act's remaining obstacles are specific: ethics language on Trump's crypto conflicts, DeFi AML provisions, and Senate floor scheduling. The legislative window is 60 to 90 days. The midterm calendar makes passage after that window mathematically unlikely. Underneath the legislation, Ripple's ODL has crossed $95 billion in cumulative institutional volume. Swift's new retail payments framework has 30 of its 50-plus member banks already tied to Ripple's ecosystem. Deutsche Bank is running both systems in parallel, and 60% of Swift-connected institutions are already engaging with Ripple's infrastructure in some form. The infrastructure story is not future-looking. It is already running. The Clarity Act is not the beginning of XRP's utility. It is the regulatory permission slip for institutions that are already watching to finally deploy capital at scale. What to watch this week? Whether the Senate Banking Committee schedules the markup before May 21st. Whether the ethics compromise language satisfies Gallego and Schiff. Whether Trump's voter ID condition creates a signature delay, even if the bill passes both chambers. 3 variables. All of them are in motion right now. This is XRP News Flow Signals. Data over narrative. Signal over noise. Every time.